I'm Bobby Zirkin, former state senator from Baltimore County, and we are here with the Maryland State Bar Association with our continuing interviews of all of the candidates for governor and lieutenant governor for this coming election. I am proud today to be, like I said, with MSBA here at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County's campus. As we approach the July primary election, the State Bar remains committed to our members and to the public at large in a nonpartisan way to bring the issues that matter to the public and to the legal profession. MSBA has appreciated the positive relationship we've had with the executive branch, and we look forward to continuing that important relationship. Please visit our website at msba.org/connect with the candidates to view all of our candidate conversations. And I'm here today, honored to be here with Michelle Siri, running for lieutenant governor with the King Siri ticket. So welcome.
Thank you, Bobby.
And thanks for being here with the Maryland State Bar Association.
No, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a proud member of the MSBA, so very happy to be here with you.
Well, great. Well, let's jump in. For those who may not know you, give us just kind of a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
And importantly, how is it that all of a sudden you've gone from being attorney to running for lieutenant governor for the state?
Yeah, I'd love to give you a little bit of background about myself. And I know, I've known you for a number of years, but I don't think you know necessarily my background or why I decided to run. So I moved to Maryland. It's been well over 20 years now. I came here for law school, and I pretty quickly fell in love with Baltimore, and then with a young man named Michael, who's now my husband, and we live in North Baltimore County with our two boys. I've spent about 2 decades now of my career as an advocate for women's rights on everything from physical safety, economic security, bodily autonomy. But as you can imagine, my story really starts well before then. I grew up, you see, straddling 2 different worlds. My dad is a proud Army veteran. He is the son of a coal miner from Ohio. But my mom was born and raised on the other side of the globe in Iran. And that's actually where my parents met, where they married, had my brother. They only came back to the States for my dad to go to college on the GI Bill, and that's when I was born. But when I was 2 months old, we packed everything up, moved back to Iran, planned to put down permanent roots there. But, unfortunately, in the wake of the Iranian Revolution and in light of the authoritarian, totalitarian, and theocracy that was taking over, we had to flee. It wasn't safe. But I'm really grateful we were able to rebuild our lives here in America. And frankly, once we came to the States, my mom was able to realize these opportunities that she never would have had otherwise. She went on to become a small business owner for her career. And it was my mom who really instilled in me this radical idea that my value isn't limited by my gender, and that it should never be. I grew up so keenly aware of how fragile my rights were, not just in Iran, but here in America as well. And so for me, this fight for women's rights and really for equality at large has always been as fundamental as breathing. Something that I know, and especially this past couple of weeks, I've known we could never, ever take for granted. But as far as my career goes, if you fast forward a little bit to the late 2000s, I was a young associate on an accelerated partnership track at a law firm, something like many of our MSBA members have been, when I had my first son, Braden. And I was one of the lucky ones. I had paid family leave. But when I got back from that leave, I learned that it didn't come without a cost. I was taken off of the partnership track. I was denied my bonus that year, despite having made my billable hours and, in fact, outbilled the 2 male associates on my floor, and essentially just sidelined in my career and told that I couldn't have that family and career at the same time. And so it's been experiences like that that I've kept with me when I'm out advocating for Maryland families, because I know that things like discrimination in the workforce, the gender pay gap, a lack of access to family leave or childcare, it's happening to Marylanders across the state, and frankly, it's happening the most to those who can afford it the least. But those are the issues that I've always been willing to fight for, whether it was as an Assistant Attorney General for the state of Maryland, whether it was as the Board President for Planned Parenthood of Maryland, in my current role as the Executive Director of the Women's Law Center of Maryland. I've never shied away from a tough fight. In fact, I've been on the front lines fighting and helping to pass legislation like the Fight for 15, the Contraceptive Equity Act, and the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. And this past year, paid family leave. Finally, after 7 years, we passed that. But I know that there's still so much left to do for Maryland families. I'll just say, every day in my work at the Women's Law Center, I see the challenges that Marylanders face just trying to make ends meet for their families. Clients come to us, they all need an attorney for an emergency domestic violence situation, but they all have a host of other needs. Many of them need affordable childcare, most of them need accessible housing, and every single one of them needs economic dignity. And so it's the work that I do every day that really highlights how important it is that our government take a holistic approach to those barriers. And that's why I decided to run for office.
Okay. Well, let's jump into some specific issues,
Sure.
things that you want to do. And I do actually have some questions. One that hasn't come up has been the paid family leave bill that was just passed. I know you were involved in its passage and how that relates to small businesses and small law firms, since we're talking to the bar. But before we get there,
Sure.
Top 3 issues, let's say, and some specificity if we can,
Sure.
for the King-Siri administration if you are elected in July?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or November?
John was the Secretary of Education under President Obama, so obviously education is going to be one of our top priorities. It's also what polls show year after year. It's one of the most important issues for folks, and we're very proud of John's role in passing the blueprint for Maryland. But we think that's a floor and not a ceiling. So for us in our education policy, it's fully investing in the blueprint and then going beyond. So making sure that we raise salaries for not only teachers, but also the paraprofessionals who are left out of the blueprint.
From the state level, from the state budget? So getting involved in giving money to teachers for
making
to
sure
local
that
jurisdictions?
making sure that we set a minimum of $60,000 for their salaries.
For a starting teacher?
For a starting teacher, yeah.
How much, any idea what that would cost the state budget?
I can get back to you on that.
Okay.
That's math.
Sorry,
That's math. I'm a lawyer.
Gotcha.
I'm a lawyer, Bobby.
Okay.
But we want to make sure that we're starting that out because we need to be supporting those teachers. But we know that salary in and of itself is not enough. We know that we need to include classroom size as a bargaining subject for bargaining because that's a huge issue. We know we need to make sure we're investing in having more counselors in our schools, and we want to partner with HBCUs and community colleges to build a pipeline for a more diverse workforce and to encourage folks to work in underserved areas. So that's education. Our second area is the economy, and it's both economic development and economic dignity. The two, they have to go hand in hand, right? They're not mutually exclusive, and frankly, the best thing for both is a good job for people. And so we want to make sure that we are investing in opportunities for entrepreneurship and small business startups, so things like a state bank that can help provide that startup funding. There's currently one state in the country that does it, and it helps folks who've been historically locked out of those lending organizations and facilities and give them that opportunity so that they don't have to drain their entire savings. So startups, we want to make sure that we are working on revitalizing main streets. So we've seen in Hagerstown and Salisbury, for example, they've done really great things to bring people back into the communities. We want to make sure that we are a leader in life sciences. So here we are at UMBC, and we've got Hopkins and Maryland and NIH and FDA all right here in Maryland. We should be that leader in the country, and yet for some reason we're not. And so we need to make sure we're partnering with those organizations. We need to make sure we're building up that infrastructure, which is so important to attract those businesses. I'm sure you were as heartbroken as I was when the World Cup passed over Baltimore, and one of the reasons was infrastructure and lack of transportation. And I'm sure we'll talk about transportation issues later, but I think that's something that we need to focus on. But the flip side of all of that is that economic dignity, and that is what I've spent a lot of my career on. And so that's equal pay for equal work. It's the fight for 15. We need to accelerate the minimum wage because right now in Maryland, average minimum wage worker has to work 2 jobs to stay above the poverty line. And so we need to make sure that we are keeping up with that, especially because those workers are disproportionately women of color. And so we need to address that. And then finally, the gender pay gap. I'm an appointed member of the state's Equal Pay Commission, and so it is shameful to me that Maryland is 7th in the nation when it comes to Latina workers. We are also towards the bottom when it comes to the size of the gender pay gap for working mothers. And that has long-term effects. It has effects on our ability to retire. It has our effects on our ability to invest and in our ability to give back and be spenders in our community.
Let me ask you a question on that. I mean, I'm the father of 2 daughters, so it's obviously something of interest, but how do you do that from the executive branch of government, right? Like, because it's obviously, under the law, you can't discriminate against somebody. And so I guess, what is it that you do to, for example, make the gender pay gap? And it's obviously something that nobody thinks should be there.
Right.
Or not nobody, but most people don't believe that there should be a pay gap, equal pay for equal work. But aside from what's already under the law right now, you can sue for things like that. What is it that you would do statutorily, legislatively, what have you?
So, President Obama actually had an executive order that unfortunately under the Trump administration was rescinded, and I'll be honest, I haven't checked to see what the status is now, but directly on, pay transparency, gender pay gap audits. That at that time it was also salary history, and so I worked really hard, and we passed just recently in the past couple of years a salary history bill that says employers cannot rely on someone's salary history when setting the new salary. A salary has to be set on the position, and state government is very uniquely situated to do those sorts of things because we have the Public Information Act, which makes public salaries public to an extent, but there's still a lot of secrecy regarding how folks move up and through the different the standards. So there's a lot of room within executive orders and pay salaries there. And then there's also the information that we can require. So we could have the Department of Labor require audit information and salary differences and that kind of statistical information, because that kind of knowledge, we can't fix a problem if we don't know where it is.
Okay.
And so that kind of information. Yeah.
All right. So let's try to unpack something. Let me jump to another issue, which try to address. Obviously, you and I both care about the city of Baltimore. This is a thorny problem, both in our city, but not just in our city, but all across the state, all across the country. There's been a tremendous increase in crime. And let me cut through some of the general of we need more jobs, we need more economic opportunity, because drug treatment, things like that. All those things are important. But every year, 350 some odd families bury their children. And so the jobs of the future and economic development, that's been something that people have talked about for 30 years. What do we do, and not that we shouldn't be doing those things, but what do we do today to stop this craziness? Because just 2 days ago, there was 3 shootings and 12 over the weekend. I mean, it's out of hand. And I guess, it's not an easy issue, but what does a King Siri administration do? I guess my question is short-term public safety.
Sure, and you're right, it's 2 different issues, right? It is short-term and long-term. We have to be addressing things now, but we also need to work to address and prevent the violence in the future, and there are things that we can do. And so we just released our One Baltimore plan, and it is a holistic approach. It is looking at the systemic issues, but it's also very much looking at the right now issues. And so I think what we need to be focused on immediately is allowing the police to do their job and allowing them to do the most important jobs when it comes to curtailing violence. So Baltimore has one of the highest rates of police officers to residents ratios in the nation. And so I don't think it's a matter of more police, it's a matter of letting the police do what they have to do. And that is things like clearing the very low murder clearance rate. Right, so they need to be closing those cases. They need to be following up on those cases. It's the sexual assault test kits.
So from the state's attorney's office.
That is definitely part of it, absolutely. Okay. It is the sexual assault test kits that are, backlogged, that are not, so those are those violent crimes. And then it's the illegal guns that are coming in. 75% almost of the violent gun crimes in Maryland, or in Baltimore City rather, are from out-of-state guns.
How do we stop that, though? I mean, I remember talking about that with Attorney General Frosch when I took over as chair, and he took over as Attorney General. We've been talking about that when he was chairman of JPR. And it's the problem's there, but it just seems like an unwinnable war to keep these guns out of Kentucky.
I think it seems like that because the police are being pulled in so many different directions, right? So if we can have them focusing on those priorities, then we can do policing plus, and that is the stuff that is, policing plus violence intervention programs, so the Safe Streets, policing plus the mental health and drug addiction, so that we can clear up the police to focus on those things. Policing plus reentry programs. So we know that 90% of people that are incarcerated are going to come back into their communities, and we want to prevent them and give them the tools necessary so that there's not this endless cycle of mass incarceration. And so we want to make sure we're addressing those issues, and then policing plus, all of the economic things that we've talked about, and that's that long-term part. But the short term is freeing up the police resources so that they can do what's absolutely necessary to stem this violence. That needs to be their top priority.
Okay. Just on the issue of mass incarceration, because I know you are down in Annapolis and have been down there for years. Maryland leads the country in terms of reducing its prison population. The Justice Reinvestment Act was a bipartisan effort with Governor Hogan and Senator
You get some
Schenck,
credit on that.
A lot of people get a lot of credit for working to get public defender, state's attorney, judges, everybody working together on that. So I guess the question, that was the most substantial criminal justice reform in the country. far superior to anything that the federal government did. So I guess what is it that was not addressed there? And who is it? Because I often hear people talk about all the people that are smoking marijuana that are in prison, but that's just not the case. That's just not a factual statement. So what is it that we missed there? I guess who's in prison that shouldn't be there now, not 5 years ago, but now?
So I think, women in Maryland have been incarcerated at a higher rate in the past decade than men, and at one of the highest rates in the nation. And we don't actually have the resources. We're still treating them as just kind of like, oh, they're just kind of, but and predominantly they're nonviolent crimes more often than not. More often than not, they're going to be mothers, and a significant portion of them are going to be single mothers. And we're not providing any of the resources for them, whether while they're in prison or when they're coming out. I'm sure you remember the legislation that finally passed a couple of years ago to get one pre-trial release facility set for women. We have 0 when there's 9 across the state for men, right? We still don't have the funding for that. That's still a fight to try and get that actually set up. So there are areas. And then I think there's, we're gonna have to have some time to work through the system and make sure that our state agencies are fully staffed and have the resources. I used to represent the Department of Juvenile Services, and they were constantly, folks would be walking off a job if they had to be held over because they didn't have childcare. And folks were constantly being held over, and then there's a snowball effect. And we see that throughout our systems, and we need to make sure that we have the right folks in place in all of those positions.
Okay. I was going to ask you about juvenile services because I did know that you were in that was a prior life. In my prior life in the House of Delegates, Chairman Valerio asked me to work on that issue. And so I guess that's an area that nobody talks about, and nobody ever did. But I know you have. What are, and it's critically important,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, that's the pipeline for
Absolutely.
for criminals. Where are we, in your opinion, right now with the Department of Juvenile Services? And assuming you think that we have some ways to go, which I don't think is a particularly controversial comment, where do you think we should go, and how do we get there?
I think the fundamental philosophy that we have in Maryland, which is different than Virginia's, which is an incarceration type system. We have a rehabilitative system here in Maryland, so we need to actually live by that value. And so I think one of the areas that we can really have room to grow is with the auto charging of youth. And so John testified, I believe, this past session on this legislation, gave some very compelling arguments about why folks at that age need a second chance in so many cases, and also about why, if we just start the system off with all juveniles being charged automatically in juvenile court, they can always get waived up. It's not like we're precluding that from happening. They can always get waived up, but let's just start with the giving them the benefit of the doubt and see if there are rehabilitation services that we can do, community services that we can do, all those interventions that we need, because that's exactly, you're absolutely right. It is the school to prison pipeline, it is the trauma to prison pipeline, and that's something that, especially when it comes to incarcerated women, they are overwhelmingly all victims of trauma, most often sexual assault and sexual abuse. And so we need to address those issues.
Okay. I was going to ask about the school resource officer program. I had a robust conversation with your running mate the first go around. And let me just preface it by saying Baltimore County has a program that is nationally acclaimed and nationally renowned for doing something a little unique, perhaps, than other states do. And everybody seems to look to Baltimore County. They have officers that are incredibly well trained. They're coaches and teachers. They're not security guards. They are intertwined with the students. And it's kind of the definition of community policing. There are some candidates and certainly some legislators who have suggested to scrap the school resource officer program because of this notion of a quote school to prison pipeline. But in places that do it correctly, that's not actually the case. So I guess the question is, what is the King Siri thought on that? And shouldn't, I guess, it's a little slanted, but shouldn't an incredible program like Baltimore County's be saved where the kids actually and the parents all want it?
Is that a leading question?
That is a little bit of a leading question,
so,
but we're in Baltimore County. So.
And I live in Baltimore County, and my son is he's just finished 9th grade at Delane High School. And I'm embarrassed to say I'm not terribly familiar with Baltimore County's program. So I don't know. I can speak on generalities, and generally speaking, The King-Siri administration is against having more school resource officers. We're against the school resource officers because all of the studies show that it does not, in fact, make the schools safer. We've certainly seen out in Texas and Uvalde, like that, the officers are not what we think they are. It gives us a false sense of protection, and at the same time, in fact, increases that prison to pipeline, school to prison pipeline. So generally speaking, I don't know, and I'm happy to look into the Baltimore County. I think that's great to know about.
It's just interesting. I mean, I was always surprised because it's such a popular issue with the public poll-wise, and it just seems like if done correctly, that this is something that most candidates say, well, it needs to be done correctly rather than scrap it. And I was interested in. We had a really interesting conversation with your running mate about it, but it seemed like that was not of interest to him. And I was just wondering if there was anything, because I'd heard some different things following that, so I was just wondering if there was any.
Yeah, I mean, again, generally speaking, against the SROs, but I would be interested in learning more. If there's a different model, I'm not opposed, I'm not going to take it off the table, I just don't know.
Okay. All right, let's move away from public safety for a sec, and I know this is an issue you touched on briefly. I'm not sure what there is to do in Maryland, but obviously the world was shaken, or the country was shaken by a Supreme Court that overturned 50 years of precedent.
Yeah.
So, I think I know your personal thoughts on that, but in terms of the state of Maryland, is this something that needs to be enshrined in our Constitution?
Yes.
And what, I guess one of the questions I have for you as an expert on this issue is, what does that actually do since we're a pro-choice state?
Yeah, absolutely, and there are a lot of things. So yes, there's a few things that we can do as a state right now since Roe v. Wade's been overturned, because we know we've already seen the influx of folks coming from out of states. Our clinic times have gone up 5 to 6 weeks. And so the longer the wait times, the longer or the higher the risk that it's going to be expensive, too risky, and the people aren't going to get the abortion care they need. So there's things we have to do here in Maryland. The first is the constitutional amendment, and I'll circle back to that in a second. The second is making sure that we fully implement the Abortion Care Access Act, which expands the scope of who can provide abortion care. So other states already do it. It's nurse midwives, it's certified physician's assistants. It's all governed by ACOG. They're the experts. We want to let them make that decision. Making the funding, releasing the funding that Governor Hogan has not released, that he could release to get the training done for those providers. Then it's protecting folks who might be criminalized either through miscarriage or attempts to get pregnant, to get abortion care in other states, or the providers who might get their licenses dinged in other states. It's making sure that we're protecting them. And then it's the collateral legal issues that we need to think about. And so that actually ties back into the constitutional amendment for a few reasons. So I testified on that bill. I was very proud to be, working hard on that legislation, and unfortunately, it didn't happen because folks thought we're overreacting, and we don't really need that in Maryland, but we knew this was coming. And what a constitutional amendment is going to do, it's going to do a few things. It's going to, of course, enshrine that right for generations to come, right? We're going to have that abortion right here, and it makes it's obviously, as you know, it's so much harder to change a constitutional amendment than it would be in a 90-day session to just, write a new statute. It's also going to give us a very, very important tool in our toolbox, because every year we used to come before your committee, for example, and there'd be 15, 16 anti-choice bills, and one of our strongest arguments is it's not constitutional. Well, we need to make sure that we have that in our arsenal. And then the other part is that by enshrining that right in our Constitution, we can expand it to make sure it is all of our reproductive health rights. And it's everything that is tied to that right to privacy that we saw in Justice Thomas's concurrence, which he's going after the Lawrence case, which is consensual sex. He's going after Griswold, which is birth control. He's going after Obergefell, which is gay marriage. And so we want to make sure that those rights are not in any way at risk. And we want to also be that North Star for the country, because I can tell you, I can assure you, in the 20 years I've been working with Planned Parenthood and with other advocates in this area, the nation looks to Maryland to be a leader on this.
Are those other rights things that also need to be enshrined in the Constitution, though?
Well, I think if we can do something that is broad enough to cover our reproductive liberty, and I think that the version that we had worked with Speaker Jones on, did just that. And I think maybe we need to tweak it and think about tweaking it. But I would take nothing for granted. I said that in the very beginning, and I will stand by that. We can never take any of our rights for granted.
Okay. This is not a specific public safety issue, but it obviously is police. And I just want to touch on this very quickly. I mentioned that this is coming out in Baltimore County again. There is a huge shortage of police officers, vacancies, lots of retirements, and individuals are just not applying to become police officers anymore. Montgomery County had a recruiting class that was 9, and they needed, I think, 70 or 80 they were looking for, and they had 9 people show up. You know, the argument's been made by some like Will Smith, like, in addition to that being a problem, public safety problem, it's also, if you're looking to have high level, if you don't have people to choose from and you have to just take whatever comes, that's an issue as well, and a kind of counterproductive to some of the things that they've tried to do in the General Assembly. That's a very long introduction to the question is, it seems like a looming crisis. What do we do about it?
Gosh, that's a really good question. And I mean, it's a crisis that I'm seeing not just in police, we're seeing it in our teachers. I mean,
Nursing?
There's nursing, oh my gosh. There's such a crisis of care right now. My mother's got some significant health issues, and just trying to find like in-home care, there's a 20,000 plus person wait list in our state. So it is a much bigger problem than police, but the police is obviously going to be an emergent issue that we need to address. And I think that there's a lot of things that we need to take a look at, including whether there's a philosophical reason that folks aren't joining the police. Is that a reason why? And is it something that we need to then change, the approach? And again, coming back to that policing plus, if those police officers are being expected to respond to every mental health crisis, that's not what a lot of folks signed up for when they become police officers. So if we can detour some of those responsibilities to folks who are prepared and are trained for those responsibilities, and I think hopefully we'll see more folks who want to become police officers for the crime fighting element to join up.
Should the state do what you had suggested with teachers and have a floor for police officer salary?
Yeah, I'd have to look at that. I just have no idea what that it is.
As important as it is for one, it seems like
Sure, of course. I just don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to ask you, I'm just
no, it's okay.
spitballing.
I don't know everything.
So you talked about, let's move back out. You talked about one constitutional amendment. To talk about a second one, which is on the ballot right now, which is marijuana legalization. As you know, I was the sponsor of the bill that decriminalized it just a few years ago with Kiefer Mitchell and others. There was an article yesterday which surprised me in CNN. It was from some health journal. I think it was the New England Journal of Medicine, but I can't swear to that. That talked about a fairly significant increase in mental health issues and emergency room visits because of cannabis, because of marijuana, and they went into details about it that I wasn't really familiar with. But I guess the question is, again, coming from the person who decriminalized it, or one of the people that was involved in decriminalizing it, if the referendum passes, in addition to the tax revenue and so forth, what do we do, if anything, about an issue like that, where you have at least some evidence that today's marijuana may not, may not be the marijuana of old, I guess?
Well, I think by regulating it, we can actually be a little bit more in control of that issue, right? I mean, so I think that might be one of the challenges, is that folks don't know what they're getting out there, and they don't know who's putting what into it, and if it's mixed with things and things like that. And so I think that's one area, is by regulating we can have some control. We definitely are in favor of legalizing adult use recreational marijuana in an equitable way. We want to take care of it. I know I'm detouring a little bit, but we want to make sure that we're taking care of the inequities, especially when it comes to licensing, not letting giant conglomerates come in and gobble up all the licenses, so that we have small businesses, so we can focus on women and people of color, folks who've been disproportionately impacted by our drug laws. We want to make sure that we get the expungement taken care of efficiently. I know I've talked actually with members of the judiciary about the challenges. They got like one big clearinghouse somewhere out, I think in maybe Frederick or Western Maryland. So we need to make sure that we kind of work on all of those issues. But I think your point is valid. And I mean, just like alcohol, we need to make sure we're putting those resources in for the mental health, the behavioral health, substance abuse. We have such a shortage. There are folks every day who want to get help, and they're being turned away because there's not enough beds. And so we need to make sure that we're putting that money there and supporting folks in all of those areas.
Any thoughts about beyond marijuana? There was one of the candidates had talked about Delegate Moorheim's old bill about, I think it's Senator Feldman now as well, the safe use injection sites. One candidate surprisingly said that they wanted to legalize all drugs. Thoughts about that from the King Siri
Gosh.
administration.
So I don't know if the King Siri administration has, at least I have not talked at length about that with John. I can say, we certainly want and are in favor of harm reduction. We don't want to make things worse for people and put them in a more dangerous position, but I'm certainly not going to go and legalize. No.
Okay. I just got the high sign for 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna run through these fairly quickly in 30 seconds or less. Talk about the environment. No, it's environmental protection. Obviously, the General Assembly, we banned fracking, but more broadly did climate change,
Yes.
legislation last year. Where does a King Siri administration build on, change what the General Assembly has done to this point?
And for those keeping score, I only got through 2 of our pillars because I think I was going a little too in depth. Our third pillar is the environment. And we absolutely, the Climate Action Act was very important, but again, it's a floor, not a ceiling as well. It wasn't specific enough. It had a lot of gaps in it, especially when it came to some of the goals. And so we have a very bold, I think, platform out there, and it is to make sure that we are net zero greenhouse emissions by 2035. We get there by having all of our state buildings be net zero by 2030. So that's public schools, public hospitals, public administration buildings. We need our state fleet to be electric by 2030, and then build up that charging stations by 10,000 charging stations to have that infrastructure.
Does that include school buses?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely includes school buses. They have to be an integral part of this. And then also, we want to, divest our state pension plans from fossil fuels. We want to stop classifying trash incineration as a clean energy. And we want to invest in that green.
Senator Huff's. That was Senator Huff's idea.
Well, I respectfully disagree with the fine senator.
No, he was on your side.
Oh, he wants to. Oh, well, then I will talk to him and we can reach across the aisle. That's perfect. But then also the green economy is really important. And we've seen it right in our own county, at Sparrows Point, where U.S. Wind is bringing manufacturing jobs back, but they are green jobs. And, they're building steel for the wind turbines. And so that's, I think, what we need to be focusing on right now.
Okay. And I guess the last thing I would ask you about is transportation issues. With the minimal time that we have left, transportation, one of the issues that individuals have talked about is the red line and the purple line. And I guess, I remember the debates. It was in the budget committee, but the debates weren't about, nobody was looking to do poorly for our city. It just was, you make an economic decision about the juice and the squeeze. And so it was a multi-billion-dollar project that had some economic advantage, and so I guess the question is, does the King Siri administration think the juice is worth the squeeze on doing it? And I guess what's the, have you done the analysis on what the economic benefit is, not just kind of the rhetoric on it, which I know that your wheelhouse is to get into detail. So why is that juice worth the squeeze?
Oh my gosh, so much. So yes, we absolutely are in favor of building and doing the red line, finishing the purple line, which is 4.5 years, $3.4 billion behind schedule, I think now. Southern Maryland Rapid Trail System, MARC trains, disability, mobility, all of that. We want to put people above cars and make sure that our transportation issues are how do people get to where they need to be, not how do we get more cars through the road quickly, right? So that's our focus. And so with the red line, I think we set Baltimore back 20, 30 years. We set Maryland back, that long, because one of the key issues for folks in economic independence is that ability to get to where they need to go. And we took that away from them. And the ability to build up, housing and markets around transportation hubs, and we took that away from them. And not only that, but it's also the environmentally sound approach to our transportation issues is that focus on public transportation.
I guess I live in Owings Mills, and so we have one of the lines.
You do.
And, it goes from Owings Mills Metro Station down to the city and back. It's one line. It goes, connects with a couple of light rail lines. If you asked me today, would you build that for billions of dollars, or are there other things like education or police you put that into? You might have a conversation about whether or not that juice is worth been worth the squeeze.
Right, but it can't be just that, right? It has to be then the buses. It has to be the other options. I went to England a few years ago with my family, and we rode the double-decker, those iconic British buses, like all the time. Even if we could have walked, we rode them because they were so much fun. And could you imagine someone coming to Baltimore and they're a tourist and they're like, yeah, we're going to go ride the bus all day, the MBA all day. Like, it's never going to happen because we haven't put that investment into those buses, which are the connectors between the major lines. And folks right now, our kids are late to school every day because the buses aren't running. I've had clients who almost don't get the protective order they need because the buses weren't running or they were running late. It's a huge access issue, and so we need to have that there as well. And now is the time to do it. We have hopefully some federal funds coming in. We've got a historic surplus right now. We're going to have some more funds coming from revenue from cannabis. This is the time to make those investments. It's short-sighted of us not to. We have to put that long-term investment in now.
Okay. Well, our half hour plus has flown.
Oh, that flew. That did fly.
And a lot of issues covered in a very short amount of time. But let me first say, just on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association, thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking about a few of the issues that are coming up. The election is coming up, actually it started already with mail-in ballots and the primary election in just a few short days. So on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association, let me just say again that if you want to see this interview or any of the interviews done with the gubernatorial candidates, lieutenant governor candidates, and attorney general candidates, please again go to msba.org/connect with the candidates. And Michelle Siri of the King Siri campaign, thank you so much for being with us and spending a little time.
It was absolutely my pleasure, Bobby. Thank you so much, and thanks again to the MSBA.
Thank you.